Good morning. I'm Sarah Hall with the Institute for Emerging Issues, a nonpartisan public policy and convening organization at NC State University. I'm pleased to welcome you to the last episode in our Talent First Tuesday series. Earlier this year, we held our annual Emerging Issues Forum that centered on growing the state's workforce with a focus on removing barriers for those who have historically, systemically, or a result of COVID-19 had difficulties connecting and engaging in the workforce. The forum featured thought leaders and community practitioners who shared their knowledge and experience on how best to address this challenge. We also had several breakout sessions that were extremely popular with participants, each focused on one unique yet very much intersectional group of workers that face barriers. The biggest complaint? Not being able to attend more than one discussion while at the forum. And of course, not everyone was able to attend the forum. So in response, we wanted to revisit each breakout session and let you be a part of a discussion again, or to join us for the first time. Today, we've brought back some of our speakers to provide high-level data and discuss an initial set of recommendations and tactics to help support opportunity youth, those ages 16 to 24, not in the workforce and not in school, connect and engage in good jobs. We have Jess Dorance, Research Director with ncIMPACT, Jonathan Guarine, Economist with the Data Analytics and Research Team at Lead with Commerce. Hopefully we'll have Randolph Keaton joining us, Director of Men and Women United for Youth and Families. We have Brandi Bragg, Workforce Connector with NENC Career Pathways, and Marcella Middleton, Alumni Trainer with Say So. After we hear from them, we'll stop recording and use our remaining time to share our collective ideas for how these recommendations could come to life in your community and regions. Before we begin, I want to provide some background about how the recommendations and tactics came to be. We received support from the U.S. Economic Development Administration and convened a task force comprised of those with systems expertise and individuals with current or recent lived experience in facing employment barriers. It was co-chaired by Annie Izod, Executive Director of the NC Works Commission, and Philip Cooper, IEI Practitioner in Residence and Workforce Equity Advocate with the Land of Sky Regional Council. In total, there were 65 task force members that met across 5 working groups. They met 4 times from September to November and identified a set of challenges they wanted to work on. Their recommendations and tactics were further discussed and refined at the forum, and we'll be sharing some of those with you this morning. There were also 7 cross-cutting themes that I want you to keep in mind during this discussion. First, ensuring that the resources available are not only easy to access, but relevant and created by those with lived experience. Second, ensuring that there are comprehensive career pathways that meet the needs of businesses, but are also meeting the needs of underrepresented groups. And that takes time, intentionality, and collaboration to achieve. Third, let's make sure our job postings are shorter, easy to understand and complete, and emphasize the key skills needed to actually do the work. Next, in order for people to consistently engage in their jobs, we need to acknowledge that there are systems that they rely on to make that happen. And we need to support the workers in those systems too. We need childcare providers, before and after school care, reliable transportation, healthcare workers, etc. And overwhelmingly, we need to support community and workforce navigators that are serving as bridge builders and connectors. Next, we need to make it easier for our boots on the ground service providers to do what they do best so they aren't spending all of their time on looking for and administering funds. And they need to be more flexible sources of funding to meet the needs of some of our most underrepresented workers. It's not one size fits all, and neither should the metrics be. Next, we shouldn't expect people to do this work alone. We can always be learning from one another and sharing what we're learning and our successes. Peer learning is a great way to accomplish this. And finally, proximity matters. Placing those with the trust of the community with the service providers not only makes it easier for the individual to access services, it helps the advocates and providers better coordinate and problem solve in a timely way. So let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Jess Dorance, who will moderate the discussion. Jess, again, is a research director with ncIMPACT Initiative, and they have been doing significant work with communities serving opportunity youth. Jess, thank you so much for joining us today and for introducing our other distinguished guests.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to get to be here. As Sarah mentioned, I work at the ncIMPACT initiative at the UNC School of Government. And as part of that position, I also have the great pleasure of getting to be a part of a team that is administering a university-wide initiative called Carolina Across 100, which is a chancellor-charged initiative that has the goal of reaching into each of North Carolina's 100 counties and helping those communities address the kind of most greatest challenge areas that they have identified as a result of COVID-19, either things sort of created by the pandemic or more likely exacerbated by the pandemic. And the first program of work has focused on the population of opportunity youth. As Sarah mentioned, these are individuals who are not working and not in school and between the ages of 16 to 24. And you'll hear a lot more about them and some of what we know about them from Jonathan in just a minute. But as a part of doing this work, I've gotten to meet many of the panelists, the folks who got to participate in this original presentation and also served as task force members, helping to really identify what some of the greatest challenge areas are and how we go about trying to address those with some specific recommendations and tactics to put sort of action behind these ideas. So it is a pleasure to get to be here. Thank you again to IEI for hosting these conversations. It's so important to really kind of open up the discussion and let people who have a whole range of expertise get to be a part of identifying and speaking to their own challenge areas and getting to be a part of those solutions. We need this to be work that cuts across all kinds of sectors, cuts across all types of individuals doing work and bringing different perspectives to the table. It requires that. This is not work that can be done by one sector alone, one type of organization alone. It really, really requires people working together and working across different sectors, breaking down those silos. So it is really a pleasure to get to be a part of this process. I want to turn it over to Jonathan to tell you a little bit about what we know of this population and what the data tells us about, again, the sort of greatest challenges and where opportunity youth are. So Jonathan, I will turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jess. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to IEI for inviting me back for this great discussion. I'm looking forward to sharing some insights with you all and then hearing from this panel afterwards and then taking any questions if time permits. So first, as Jess mentioned, my name is Jonathan Guarine. I am an economist with the Labor and Economic Analysis Division, or LEAD, within the North Carolina Department of Commerce. We specialize in using big data tools, economic research, and communication to help others make better informed economic decisions. So we work with stakeholders from across the spectrum, from local workforce development boards all the way up to the governor's office. And my goal for this brief presentation is to provide you all with some data-informed context for the discussion on opportunity youth. And so most of the points that I will be making are quantitative, but again, you'll hear a lot more from the qualitative experiences and perspectives later on. And I encourage you to take the two together and allow that to kind of guide your decision-making, because there's great value when you can use the quantitative and the qualitative to inform policymaking. So to get started, I'd like to begin with sort of a working definition. You've heard this already this morning from both Sarah and Jess, but I think a working definition is helpful for us to understand how we measure this group using data. So opportunity youth are teens and young adults ages 16 to 24 who are neither in school nor working. This quote below kind of illustrates this important point that despite facing many hardships, opportunity youth often express great optimism and responsibility for their futures and have many goals accordingly. So according to some of the latest comprehensive data that we have from the US Census Bureau, in 2021, there were roughly 155,000 opportunity youth in North Carolina. This equates to about 1 in every 8 North Carolina youth and young adults. And when we consider some of the demographic breakouts according to age group and sex, we see that young adults in that older 20 to 24 age group tend to exhibit higher opportunity youth rates relative to their younger peers. Another detail worth mentioning is that depending on which age group you're looking at, the percentages tend to be higher for a particular sex. So for example, males have higher opportunity youth rates in that younger 16 to 19 range, whereas females have higher opportunity youth rates in that older 20 to 24 range. However, upon deeper look of the data, it appears that the male 20 to 24 group saw the biggest increase since the pandemic began. The gap is a lot smaller on the screen than what it was a few years ago. And although the details of why that is still to be determined, I think that's an observation that's worth mentioning. There are also many differences between young people who may be considered disconnected or connected beyond their educational or employment status. So I do use the terms disconnected and connected in this graph to make the comparisons a little easier to understand. And so disconnected youth are about 3 times more likely to have a disability of some kind compared to their connected peers. So 17.5% versus 5.3%. Disconnected youth are also 2 times more likely to be living in poverty, uninsured, and or receiving Medicaid. They're slightly more likely to be immigrants. And then quite notably, disconnected youth are about 9 times more likely to have dropped out of high school and 2 times more likely to only have a high school diploma with no further education. And so disconnected youth are less likely to have a bachelor's degree. And then finally, regarding some of the family interrelationships, disconnected youth are more likely to have children, and especially the case among young women with children. And so up until this point, most of the data that I have presented to you has relied on more of the single year data available from the US Census Bureau. However, as an economist, I believe that trends over time are very important to understand and analyze to kind of understand what are the changes that have been taking place across our economy. So this graph right here shows the percentage of opportunity youth in North Carolina from roughly the Great Recession to the post-pandemic period. And so from this graph, you can see a few things. First, there's this slow and steady decline in the percentage of opportunity youth after the Great Recession and leading up to the pandemic. So from 2011 to 2019, the rate fell from 16% to 11%. And then in 2020, you see this sudden uptick to 13%, corresponding, of course, to the COVID-19 pandemic and all those related disruptions. The detail that I'd like to key in on is what happened in 2021. That percentage of opportunity youth actually declined back to 12%, indicating some of the rapid recovery that took place after 2020. And why I think this is significant is because this is very different from what we saw after the Great Recession. This post-Great Recession period, there was a lot of sluggish economic recovery. You see that percentage gradually declined, but still remained elevated for quite some time. And so after the COVID-19 recession, you saw this recovery 1 year after. So I think a natural question is, well, what explains this? So going back to that working definition I mentioned earlier, there are 2 factors to consider when looking at opportunity youth, and that is enrollment and employment. Well, when we can separate out these 2 components, we see that primarily employment is what's driving this overall decline in the opportunity youth rate. Or stated differently, employment is really driving a lot of youth connection here. So from 2011 to 2019, and ever since the pandemic recovery really began, youth employment rates in North Carolina increased from 44% to 53%. In contrast, youth enrollment rates stayed rather level over the past decade, hovering around 59%. So we can infer that employment is really what's led to that quicker recovery since the pandemic began, and what kind of drove that quicker recovery in 2021. And I think this begs yet another question of why have youth employment rates risen so much in North Carolina, and why does that fit into this opportunity youth trend over time? Well, a lot of this can be attributed to the tight labor markets that we've been experiencing, which have fueled a lot of faster wage gains for youth. So this figure right here shows wage growth among youth ages 16 to 24 and compares it to other age groups. So prime age workers, ages 25 to 54, older workers older than 55. And what we can see is that wage growth has been fastest among youth over this period and since especially 2021. And the reason this is the case is because industries that primarily employ youth, such as leisure and hospitality, some of your trade industries, saw some of the fastest rates of wage growth throughout the post-pandemic recovery. These are also some of the industries that had some of the tightest labor market conditions and labor shortages. Thereby, you saw a lot of this wage growth in this area. So overall, this has had the effect of drawing in more youth to employment opportunities throughout North Carolina. And this is the case across the nation, and especially when we look at some of the data that we have at LEAD, being able to follow some of the same people over time, we see that this is the case across the board. I would be remiss if I didn't say a little bit more about some of the enrollment trends among youth in North Carolina. So it goes without saying that numerous disruptions to learning occurred across the academic environment since the pandemic began. Through some of my own research, I looked at the college-going rates among recent high school graduates compared to pre-pandemic cohorts. The college-going rate refers to the percentage of graduates who enroll in higher education during their following fall semester. And what my research findings is that, like we see across the nation, college-going rates have declined for recent cohorts. Even when we consider students who may have taken a gap year, we still see this decline. And this decline has been rather pronounced for enrollment into our state's community colleges. So quickly recapping, even though youth employment rates have grown significantly over the past decade and since the COVID-19 recovery kicked off, we are still seeing lagging recovery when it comes to enrollment trends. So in closing, I'd like to leave you all with some key takeaways before going into our panel conversation or hearing from some of the other speakers. So first, COVID-19 increased challenges for youth, but there was a quick rebound by 2021. There's still a lot of progress to be made, but this is progress in the right direction. The rapid economic recovery following the COVID-19 recession contrasted with the sluggish post-Great Recession period. A lot of the faster wage growth due to tight labor market conditions has fueled employment opportunities for youth in a number of industries. Yeah, despite these economic advancements, there are still some disparities across demographic subgroups worth considering and keeping in mind. Education challenges persist, but present opportunities for many advocates and change makers. Long-term career readiness continues to be an important part of this as we prepare youth for the many economic changes that we expect to see in the years to come. Work-based learning will play an increasingly important role alongside more of those traditional education routes. And then finally, community action and social capital are critical for opportunity youth. I think there's a lot of cool research in this area, especially recently, looking at some of the connections between social capital, economic mobility, and how that relates to youth. And I believe that this is an important focal point for opportunity youth conversations. And then lastly, I'll just say that everyone plays a very important role in fostering connection in their communities, whether that's convening the different stakeholders, providing the resources, or simply providing a space for opportunity youth to engage with one another. And I think that's something important to keep in mind. So those are just some brief data insights. Thank you for allowing me to briefly share those with you. Later on, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have relating to those. And I'm looking forward to the coming conversation. As I mentioned earlier, there's great value with those qualitative perspectives and experiences. And I very much encourage all of you to take that with some of the quantitative data that I had just shared with you. So my contact information is there on the screen. Beyond this webinar, if you'd like to reach out and ask any particular questions, I'm always happy to answer. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Jess. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's so helpful to have that kind of level setting and provide that type of quantitative data so we have a sense for what this population looks like, what the trends have been over time, the impact of COVID, and how things have recovered since then. So I appreciate you sharing those data insights with us very much. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations from the task force. So here is a slide showing some of the recommendations specific to opportunity use. So I'm just going to read through these briefly. And you'll see a note in the chat that there's some additional data that can be found in IEI's data brief. And there's a link to take you there for folks who want to go a little deeper. So One of the challenges noted by the task force is that the workforce system can be difficult to navigate. That might not be surprising to many of you on this call. So a recommendation is to implement a network of community navigators who establish trust with opportunity youth and help them develop critical life skills. And I just want to kind of underscore that point about developing and establishing trust. Some of what we know from the work that we've been doing at ncIMPACT and with some of our partners here on the call is that that cannot be sort of emphasized enough, that having a trusted partner or intermediary or just advocate, a person in a young person's life is really critical. And a tactic here is to identify and review state and nationally recognized certified community health workers and success coach programs that can provide scalable models for credentialing navigators and advocates. Next challenge is limited alternative career pathways for opportunity youth. A recommendation is to develop and integrate workforce certification programs into high school curricula to link students to alternative career opportunities upon graduation. A couple of tactics are now that certifications are legal to obtain during the school day, bring community college training to high schools to make it easier for youth to gain those skills and credentials that lead to high wage and in-demand employment. And also to cultivate stronger partnerships between K through 12 schools, youth-serving organizations, and local workforce development boards. Workforce development boards offer workforce and employment training programs targeted for youth, but many face recruitment barriers. Another challenge identified by the task force is the lack of exposure to career opportunities that are interesting and engaging to opportunity youth. I think this is absolutely something that, again, some of the work that we've been doing at ncIMPACT has included a series of focus groups around the state, which include talking to young people directly, as well as to employers and workforce support providers. And it is very true that having sort of additional exposure to what opportunities can look like, and not only the kind of range, the breadth and depth of opportunities, but the ability to really let young people know that in certain industries or sectors, there's still a range of opportunities within that. They expand beyond what might seem like the traditional type of position in that industry or sector. And an example we heard a lot was in the healthcare sector, so that it's not always a doctor or a nurse. There are all kinds of other career opportunities within that sector, and to really open young people's eyes to what that might look like and really allow them to sort of see and think expansively about that. So one of the recommendations that has been proposed is to expand job and career shadowing programs tailored for opportunity youth. And here are some of the tactics. I'll try to read through these a little more quickly. Develop a model that meets youth where they are, such as summer camps, job shadowing programs, and workplace learning programs. Engage opportunity youth around their needs and their vocational aspirations. Try to match those aspirations with relevant opportunities. Promote and utilize nccareers.org, a no-cost comprehensive career information system that provides interest and skill assessment tools that can help connect youth to in-demand jobs or appropriate education and training information, as well as non-degree credentials provided by employers. Expose youth to entrepreneurship by making resources and opportunities more accessible. This can include scaling best practice programs and expanding the scope and reach of entrepreneurship programs that have not typically engaged opportunity or youth in the past. And materials and resources promoting these job opportunities, education and workforce initiatives should be marketed in a way that attracts opportunity youth and be led by young people themselves. The messenger can really matter a lot. So that's an important factor to consider. So now that folks have had the opportunity to get a little more familiar with those recommendations, if they hadn't already, I want to open up the conversation to bring in our panelists. And I know that another one of our panelists will be joining us momentarily. But I want to take a minute and let Brandi introduce herself and talk a little bit about Northeast North Carolina career pathways. And then I'll start with the question for folks to respond to, and we'll get a little conversation going. So Brandi, I'm going to turn it over to you to let you introduce yourself real quick and tell us a little bit about your organization.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jess. So my name is Brandi Bragg. I serve as the workforce connector for Northeastern North Carolina. So I work for 3 workforce boards: Northeastern, Rivers East, and Turning Point. And I've been doing this for the past about 6 years. We cover 20 counties, and we work with K-12, community colleges, universities, employers, community partners in a very collaborative fashion to reach not just youth, but also adults as well. So we work on a lot of different, very cool projects, including one that Jess is very familiar with the Carolina Across 100. So I'm very happy to be here today and look forward to this conversation.
And I also want to give Randolph Keaton a minute to say hello and welcome, Randolph. It's great to see you. I always get a little nervous when I see people in their cars, but we'll let you say hello, introduce yourself, and Men and Women United for Youth and Families.
Absolutely. Thank you. I hope you guys can hear me fine.
We got you.
Yes, thank you. I'm Randolph Keaton. I'm the Executive Director of a small nonprofit located in Delco, North Carolina, Men and Women United for Youth and Families. We serve primarily Bladen and Columbus counties, very rural, very quaint areas with somewhat of some challenges that we've been able to directly work through. We work with a lot of young people, a lot of youth, primarily through our Youth Ambassadors for a Better Community program. We also work with our juvenile justice systems and some of the other workforce development partners where we have a direct link with some of the youth that are in the community. That's just one portion of our work. We do a lot of other things, but I'm just so happy to be on the call this morning. Jess and the folks with Carolinas Across 100. It's been a great opportunity for us to lift up more the needs of our opportunity youth in our area, to try to find some meaningful and engaging work or getting them into school. So thank you for having me this morning.
Thank you for being here. Jonathan mentioned this when he was going through some of the quantitative data, that there's also the more qualitative side of this, hearing from the kind of stories and experiences of young people and people who work to support them. So I want to open up this conversation to hear a little bit more from Brandi and Randolph about your experiences, and start by asking you to tell us a little bit about which of those recommendations that we went through kind of quickly, but which of those recommendations and some of the tactics and strategies really sort of resonate most with you and your experience in your communities. And I'll start with you, Brandi.
Thank you. Yeah, first, let me say all of those recommendations are powerful, right? Like, we see the need for those navigators in the community. That's really important. The workforce boards really tying into it. But I'll tell you, my heart is the career awareness and exposure, because if you can't see it, you can't be it, right? And so a lot of times kids only know the jobs that the people in their families or places that they go have. They don't know the plethora of careers that are available to them, often in their own backyards. And so this is something we've been working on from the workforce board side for a while now, and working with our partners in education and industry. Really trying to better offer those opportunities, even into like some of the earn and learn opportunities with apprenticeship and internships, because sometimes you can think that you want to do something, and until you get in there you don't know. I was actually just meeting with the Dare County CTE director last week, and she was telling me about a former student who thought she wanted to be a veterinarian. And they were able to get her an internship with a local vet office where she discovered that they have to euthanize a lot of animals. And that was not something that she was able to handle. So she learned that before she went through all those years of school and all of that money to get into that situation. And now she's still working around animals, but not in a way where it's going to affect her so greatly. So that's something else I think a lot of young people don't always grasp. They think, oh, I've got to put this plan in place and I've got to follow it. But that's not how life works, right? I don't know how your career path looks, but mine is a bunch of swirlies and turning back and forth and just having to pivot based on where my life is at the moment, where my opportunities are at the moment. And I think that's something that we're seeing a lot as we're able to talk with youth out in the community, explaining to them that you don't have to have it all figured out and that it is okay to change your mind. But having those early times that you can learn what's out there and kind of figure out if that is a good place for you to go is also important. I'll also say this stuff sticks in these kids' minds. So we've got a great project going on called Made in the Rivers East area, where we're looking at manufacturing in those counties. What are the companies? What are the jobs? Not just the engineering and the machine operating, but also in the finance department and the marketing department. What are all of those jobs that are included? And we were doing a shoot at the Boys and Girls Club and talked to a senior, and we asked all these kids, what is manufacturing? Of course, they, for the most part, don't know. But this one senior girl said, I know Thermo Fisher is a manufacturer because I went there through a Grow Local program, which the chamber puts on every year, when I was in 8th grade. And I know that that's a manufacturing company and that it's a good job that you can go and do. So even though she maybe didn't know anybody that worked there, somebody had given her that opportunity to go in and see what it was about. Now, she knew that wasn't what she wanted to do, but she still knew it was an opportunity that existed out there for her. And that's really in all of these projects and programs that we're doing throughout the Northeast and really throughout the state. There's a lot of people doing good work to expose these students to these careers, and sometimes exposing even their parents and their families and friends, as well as we're able to share this information with kids who may be in school, so don't necessarily fit the opportunity youth piece. They've got friends who are outside of school who have left for whatever reason. We saw in Jonathan's, one of his slides, all the barriers. And, that is a lot of the reason why opportunity youth are opportunity youth. There's so many barriers in place. And so even by reaching the students who are still in school, we can still affect those students who maybe are in that place of opportunity youth. And I'll just finish with this. We are working through Carolina Cross 100 on a project with the Vitality Center in Bertie County. And we actually held an event there a couple of weeks ago. It's probably been about a month now. We had Elizabeth City State came, they brought their drones. We had Martin Community College out there. We had quite a few employers. The kids, the parents, they were blown away with the opportunities that they didn't realize existed out there. We were able to feed them and offer, some good incentives for being there. But to Jess's point from earlier, it's because we were able to connect with a very trusted community leader in that area. And so these folks knew, hey, we can trust that this is going to be, something good for us and a good opportunity. And that's really what we need. We've got to connect to those leaders in the community and then find a way to expose and in a way make students and youth more aware of the opportunities. So that was a whole lot in a little bit of time, but I hope that answered your question.
That was perfect. Thank you. And I love so much of what I'm hearing about all the creative ways that organizations are trying to let young people basically try on different types of jobs and careers. I think that is so important now, especially that just to the story you shared about someone sort of not realizing all the different aspects of a job and being able to kind of expose young people earlier on to what jobs might look like, both the good and the bad, so that they can find where they fit, and find the thing that works best for them. And I think it's also, I don't have an answer for this, but careers, again, to your point, don't always look like a straight line. There are curves, there are turns, there are kind of switchbacks. You might kind of, find yourself on one path and realize life throws you some kind of curveball, and you need to go another way, or you choose to go another way. And that we can prepare young people with skills, expose them to different opportunities so that they can create their own path, which might have all these different twists and turns to it, but that never leaves them in a place of no options or no opportunities. That all those things can be still a perfectly, can still create a path. There's not going to be something that stops you, creates like a fence or a gate that you can't get around, because we will have helped lay all of the foundation and packed their bags and with all the things they might need to kind of make that path. So thank you for sharing some of those examples and those stories. Randolph, I want to turn it to you to have you talk a little bit about any of the particular challenges and recommendations that kind of resonate the most for you. And I know that you may not have had a chance to listen in on all of those. So some of them were about kind of limited career pathways for opportunity youth, a lack of exposure to career opportunities, being able to develop kind of new certifications for young people, connecting them with trusted resources. Those were some of the kinds of recommendations. And I'm wondering if you could speak to what of those things really resonates for you and some of the work that Men and Women is doing in your community.
Wow. So thank you, Jess, so much for this opportunity to speak. And having been a part of the task force and talking with folks that may have had some similar experiences as we've had in rural Columbus and Bladen counties. So as a nonprofit organization, a lot of the folks who are in that line of work traditionally find an issue or a challenge and then create some deliverables from that. And what I mean by that is if you're working in rural communities where our youth in particular have no resources that they feel speak to their particular needs. For example, around finding employment for them or supporting and helping them if they have issues within the systems, whether it be the school systems, mental health systems, the social services systems. So what we find ourselves doing as nonprofit directors is working with the whole family. So my experience in doing more case management we are here to serve our partners, right? So because of barriers to transportation and other things, so we're in the community to serve that. So having the need for case management, which is similar to when we start talking about our community health workers, having some folks in the community who we feel are the experts. I feel like from a perspective of being a nonprofit organization, where you have to apply for funding for certain programs, or you leverage relationships by partnerships. So for us here in Columbus County, Men and Women United for Youth and Families serves those folks who come through the juvenile justice system, and again, all those systems. So we've been able to create a program, our Youth Ambassadors for a Better Community program, which, maybe since 2008, when we came around, the issues that we're trying to address now with Opportunity Youth have always been here, had been exacerbated by the pandemic. And so needs like broadband internet, needs such as food, such as housing and clothes and clothing and particular jobs. So typically nonprofits like us, when the community is reaching out to us for their issues, then we try to find solutions for those. So we've created a program again around working with our youth who themselves have identified what their barriers are. 9 times out of 10, when they come to us, it's for employment or some other need. And so we partner with our workforce development boards, in some cases, our community colleges, with our local businesses, and so to speak, to try to create plans around how do we get our youth engaged? How do we keep them from ending up in the juvenile justice system? So vital to that is the community leaders, elected officials and others, where we have an organized group of youth who can then speak to their needs and their issues. So we've been very successful in working with our universities and such to create apprenticeship programs where we have young people that are working in agriculture. So they have their own ways of making their own money. They are entrepreneurs, so they sell produce at the farmers markets. We've actually found what our niche was primarily, and we've used our leveraging of resources such as grants and other funding to build a model, so to speak, and having now working with Carolinas Across 100 and then ncIMPACT to help build upon those building blocks that we have. The youth themselves are, they have an intricate role in that because they're the youth leaders. We've been able to create a youth-led food policy council. We've been able to create a program called Manners, Junior Manners, the first one in the state. So our youth are pretty proud of the fact that they are actually taking responsibility for their own future, so to speak. We have internship programs that we partner through funders and other universities, so that our young people who go off to school, they are able to come back to the community. And one of our very own, who's our project manager for our project through Carolinas Across 100, Alyssa Deltz, is a product of these programs that we have. And she's back and she's a leader now. And this is just one case of many of the young people who are. So I guess in a nutshell, I said a whole lot, but just looking, but just kind of looking at the whole piece, we've been able to work with our partners, not alone, but to leverage success.
Yeah, I think something that is really striking me about comments from both of you is that there is this sort of holistic approach. You sort of see young people as whole people who have all kinds of needs in their lives and all kinds of barriers. And the other thing that sort of struck me is that there is this need to, which you all are both trying to address, of getting the young people involved in the solution making. Let them identify and let all of us know what their specific barriers are. We might not know what those are, and let us know what solutions look like for them. So I'm struck by some things that I hear as sort of similarities from both of you about the work that you're doing, and also something that you both spoke to quite a bit was this recognition of partnership. Again, these are not things that happen each of your organizations doing this work all by yourselves. You all both do incredible work and so much, but you also rely on partners who help to fill in, at different points along kind of a spectrum. And something that you both sort of alluded to, and it's something that we've talked about in our work with the two of you and with the work of Carolina Across 100, is that young people, opportunity youth in particular, are sort of on a continuum. There are some who are addressing some very basic needs before they can make the next step. And then there are others who might have all of those needs kind of there in a secure place. They just need a connection point. They need an opportunity opened up to them. They need to have exposure to a particular kind of career path and everything in between. And it's important for us, this is in the language of the recommendations, but to really meet young people where they are on that continuum, and try to address those needs so they can make their way to a next step that's progress for them. So I just wanted to point out some of the things that I was hearing as sort of themes between your remarks and that connect directly to the recommendations of this task force and the kind of tactics that are being put forward as opportunities to take action on these things.
I want to thank you all for being with us today. Jonathan, Jess, Randolph, and Brandi, we appreciate all that you do, and just continue to look forward to the outcomes of your Carolina Across 100. And we have Brett Benton on the call. So of course, great work with My Future NC as well, and all they're doing to support Opportunity Youth. So the recorded portion of today's conversation will be available later today as a special episode of our Connected podcast. We will also share all of our Talent First Tuesday recordings on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn. These can be found on our website at emergingissues.org. Thank you again for joining us today, and for everyone who joined us for the Talent First Tuesday series. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and week. And until next time, let's stay connected.